the recording and let people in. So thank you everyone, good afternoon, joining us in one of our last sessions of the conference today. So my name is Sean and I'll be helping to chair this session, and I would first just like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land where I am joining from today, the Yagara and Turrbal people, and the traditional owners of the lands where you are joining from as well. And so today we have Edward Quevedo and Holger Hampf joining us for a session on cultural transformation and the wellbeing economy, breakthrough measures for regenerative development. And so the session will run for about an hour and will be a bit of an interactive workshop. So I'd like to pass over to Edward and Holger to introduce themselves and their work.
Yeah, I think we should thank you so much, Sean, and to the colleagues for helping us get here and for choosing the session. Holger, I think we should go alphabetically. I think it's okay. Maybe you introduce yourself first and your work, and then I'll go second, if that's okay.
That's very nice of you, Ed. Yeah, thank you from my side as well. Glad to join your session. I'm glad to be one of the speakers. Hope you have a good conference so far. My name is Holger Hampf, and I'm dialing in from California, a city where I live, Ventura, close to Los Angeles. Yeah, Ed asked me to join this session for a few reasons. I'm currently heading a design consultancy called DesignWorks. DesignWorks is a fully integrated subsidiary of BMW Group. You might know the car company, from Germany, from Bavaria. And BMW started this business model some 25 years ago when they acquired DesignWorks, with the idea to bring outside-in knowledge, observation and inspiration to BMW Group. You know, very often with especially German car companies, there's a belief that Germany, Bavaria specifically, is the center of the world. But BMW has the foresight to kind of look at the entire globe where they sell their products to better understand markets and users. And that's exactly the role of DesignWorks. So we basically bring information to Munich from around the globe. We have 3 studios. I'm running 3 studios with roughly 150 people here in the US, another studio in Shanghai, and a studio close by the development center in Munich. So 3 studios, 3 locations. And we try to kind of bring this information, this observation, with a very positive attitude, with you know, a positive creativity to Munich. So we provoke the parent organization with new ideas, outside the box thinking. Yeah, about myself, just a couple of words. I'm a trained industrial designer, product designer. And I have been with BMW since roughly 22 years, I believe. And I'm not a car guy. This is what you like, how you would call someone who has maybe drawn cars from the early childhood. This doesn't apply to me. But I'm a designer by heart, a maker, a creator, and as of late, I'm much more drawn by designing processes and designing interaction rather than physical products. Ed and I came together a long time ago when Ed consulted to BMW. We introduced a sustainability management system to DesignWorks. And yeah, since then we stayed in contact, and as of late, we have a lot more dialogue around regenerative design, circular economy, all topics that are very, very hot for BMW right now. BMW committed earlier this year to focus on 3 major topics with their products: digitalization, electrification of vehicles, and circularity. And circularity is now expressed in cars that are aiming to introduce a very high level of recycled materials and also make sure that the materials that are used in building cars can be returned to the system and used again over and over again. So again, very interested in this context, the conference, and I'm hoping to be able to contribute. So thanks again.
Wonderful, Holger. Thank you. Thank you. And folks, just to remark here that we hope this is a conversation. Holger and I have some provocations at the beginning of the time, but we really want to have a conversation with you and think about the role of the necessary changes in society to face the most complex social, ecological, and economic challenges that we face. The Foresight Lab is a diplomacy agency and cultural transformation, civil rights practice, and diplomacy agency. I myself am a teacher by nature and a diplomat by training. And through the programs, the Foresight Lab, which is now 25 people in several bureaus around the world, we work with the institutions of civil society, philanthropy, the private sector, the government sector, and the nonprofit sector to build what we call the well-being economy, an economy that is inclusive, just, and verdant. And from dealing with systemic racism and predatory policing in the United States, to dealing with commissions from the African Union to rebuild communities in Africa, to philanthropic reinvention, to bring American philanthropy into a 21st century of generosity and community-led transformation rather than paternalistic and colonial transformation. We look all the time at the measures of well-being. And I would offer, to begin with, what we think about in the conventional world as indicators of well-being. For example, GDP, which is a deeply and almost brutally inadequate way of measuring well-being. But here in the United States, our politicians are famous for saying the stock market is great, so everything must be great. And neither GDP nor the stock market nor the Dow Jones is a representation of well-being. Certainly not a representation of well-being of the least among us, the most marginalized communities on whose behalf we at the lab tend to labor. And with our colleagues at BMW, we're exploring this terrain of regenerative design, which asks us to think much more creatively about things like health and nutrition. Mostly our measures are measures of failure. All the measures, the social determinants of health, are measures of failure. As one important American politician said, Robert Kennedy, the GDP measures our failures, our manufacture of war and cigarettes, our manufacture of conflict and hospitals to cure our ills, rather than the measure of our play and the joy of our company, the strength of our family bonds, the knitting together and vibrancy of our communities. These are the kinds of measures we think of. And when we think about our role as citizens, as activists, as participants in a global economy that needs a rethink, I would just ask you to think, and we can get into this hopefully by thinking about what are the measures that are important to think about from the academy and from government, from the private sector, from philanthropy, indeed even at the UN level, to reimagine, even to think bigger than the SDGs. So it's these kinds of measures that we want to invite this conversation to re-examine. And with that opening, I'll toss it back to Holger to talk a little bit about the role of design and designers. So to you, Holger, please.
Yeah, I think in design, or from my perspective at least, I feel that we are at a very significant inflection point on the path towards collective well-being. And in design, we collaborate, we co-create. And I feel that it is a very different discussion that we're starting right now, or that we have started. It's a transdisciplinary discussion, and it involves everyone from the community itself to major stakeholders. We all realize that no one single entity can solve the problems that we're facing alone, and we're trying to kind of do several things at the same time. We're trying to actually go beyond sustainability in design. That is something that applied to products and services so far. We're trying to create beautiful experiences by looking at entire systems, by looking at user journeys, at customer journeys, and we are aiming at the well-being of society. And this is very exciting for a designer, because, like I said in the beginning, we see ourselves generally as positive thinkers, as creative thinkers, and we approach some of these things with a certain naivete, I would say, and we are always applying attitudes like curiosity to our process, and we are problem solvers, yes, but I think the process that leads to a solution is very interesting, and the path there is actually what I would like to get a bit more into in today's discussion. So maybe there's one slide or one image that we would like to share with you today. And that is something that we have been using at DesignWorks as a bit of a kind of a process map, and maybe something you can take home from this session today. Simply, we call these process steps design patterns. It's about creating positive and desirable perspectives to stakeholders within teams and communities, within groups such as this. And those patterns are aiming to change user behavior, to be open-minded and engage into a conversation. So what we have here, simply, if you start clockwise with reframe narratives, in design, we very often talk about the quality of the story. Very often designers are actually being called storytellers. So reframing narratives means that you have to tell a very good story. You have to, like any good book, you have to pull an audience into it. You have to awake their curiosity about certain topics, and you have to make it sound very good, tell a good story all the time. Enable transparency is really about how we talk to one another. We need to talk to one another with clarity, honesty, authenticity, and that's very important. Not to hold back, not to kind of beat around the bush, but to come straight to the case and do that with utmost transparency. In design, often we talk about many different solutions and then kind of slowly arriving at the final solution that you want it to be. So providing alternatives is very important, and don't kill an idea too early. So there have to be many ideas to start with. In the design process, very often we deploy 20 designers to think about one solution. We select down to 5, to 3, and finally to 1. So again, don't kill ideas too early. Start with many ideas, and allow even the weirdest ideas to be discussed by the group. Reimagining mental models is something that I relate to organizations, businesses such as BMW. I think BMW started with airplane engines and motorcycles and other things before they landed on cars. Why can organizations not change? So this is about thinking outside the box, thinking about what else you could do, and allowing yourself to kind of get out of the comfort zone and charter unknown territory. Very, very important, and also something that design is very comfortable with. And the last one, facilitate cultural change, is really about putting the user, the customer, always at the center of your thinking. As a designer, this is about, if you think about products or services, regenerative design, you have to kind of determine what the advantages are, what an individual or a group of people, a community, can get out of it. What is that you want to better about something. So again, something that is very natural, comes very natural to a designer, because we constantly want to improve the world, and we just have this urge to kind of look for mistakes in the system and come up with better solutions for people, for communities, and so on. So maybe something to take away from today's session. Ed, back to you.
Yeah, thank you, Holger. I hope questions are coming up for you, colleagues. We really do want to enter into a dialogue with you, and to provoke this, I want to ask a question. And I will say that Holger is a very gifted teacher, and I am a teacher as well, and we are comfortable with awkward silence. So if we invite a question and you don't respond, we all just might sit here in a Zen moment and think for a moment. But I'd like to ask you to consider the fact that we are all designers. We are designers of our own life, of our own destiny, whether we work at a cash register in a retail environment or have the privilege of doing design of society or reimagining society. We're all designers, and how we arrange things, from how we arrange our own personal values, how we arrange our lives with our families, what we expect of our governments and our leaders, down to how do we arrange our economy. These are all things, fruits of our own labors. And so I would ask the question to provoke you, what is the economy for? This is a conference about the well-being economy, the beautiful fundamental gesture of NENA, the new economy. What is the economy for? Anyone?
Yeah, I can have a go.
Please do. Who's speaking? Is this Scotty?
Yeah, this is Scotty.
Go for it, Scotty.
Yeah, sorry for the seasickness. I'm just out walking the dog. So, yeah, what is the economy for? Well, I reckon the economy is a word that it's more of a description sort of word. It describes the way we organise to meet our needs in the first place. So what's it for? It's there to meet our needs, but of course it's grown way beyond that.
It's a great starting place, Scotty. Thank you. Please do continue to weigh in. Catherine, do you have something you want to offer? You're muted there. There you go.
I think the economy, apparently the original Greek word economos means household. It's how we live as individuals within a group, within a culture, within a nation. So it's about the household.
That's great. Thank you. Oikonomia.
I love that. Yeah.
Greek root. Yeah, the Greek root, housekeeping. And think about the house we share, this beautiful blue and green marble floating through space. It has limits. And from the time of the 1970s, when Limits to Growth was published, founding the discipline of systemics, we have treated the natural gifts of the global economy like an account in bankruptcy, rather than shepherding them for future generations. The arrangements we make put us all rather in service of the economy, rather than, as Scotty said, vice versa, having it be in service of us. So, we think about what might be your role from each of your positions, whether you're in academics or in private sector work, or in civil society and government work, or maybe you work in the nonprofit or impact sector. What is your role in designing a better economy? What can you do from where you sit?
Good question.
Paolo, you want to weigh in?
I can answer.
Oh,
sorry.
I'd just like to say something, sorry. In terms of our role, I think most of us are a bit distracted with the global economy. We are working towards an economy that doesn't really serve us. It serves the planet, it serves the rich people, it serves some governments. It doesn't serve us directly. And I think it's this shift of focus from the global to the local. And you can make local as small as you wish. It can be your household. But it's this shift from working in a global economy that you don't know why you're working there, that you are in a way enslaved by it, by the economy and by what it means in our society today. And it's more focusing on us, on our household and our communities. Yeah, I think that's probably it. Thank you.
It's really good.
Yeah.
Thank you. Holger, oh, sorry, Catherine. Catherine, go ahead, please, and then Holger.
Just very briefly, you asked us about, your question, I think, was about what's our part in it and how do we see ourselves within the economy. I'm already living my relationship in the new economy, which is finding ways through the arts and culture to connect with the land locally. So I'm doing that through working with outdoor education with kids, food swap, growing food locally, and also working towards establishing local governance frameworks so that we can directly connect with, and develop citizen assemblies so that we can have more decision making from the ground up.
Mm-hmm. Sounds wonderful. I think it sounds already like you are a designer. So you're designing some of the things, in a recent discussion that Ed and I participated in, we've talked about today's shortcomings in the world around the globe. We talked about public health. We talked about in the US police brutality, terrible housing situations, homelessness, and so on. And I think, that was almost like a bit of an epiphany for me as a designer when Ed said, like, all of these things start as a result of poor design. It's actually, it gave me a bit of a shiver that, I might after all be also at fault at some of these things because, we have an influence as designers. So Catherine, when you say kind of some of these things that you do, they sound already like processes that you are taking charge of, and you're kind of starting them the right way. My question would be, and this is maybe connected to what was said before, the scale of things. Are some of these things that you do scalable in a certain way? How are they repeatable and kind of can project out into the world? The things that we definitely as designers see, as flaring opportunities everywhere. People care. Start smaller communities, think local. I said earlier, I went to the farmers market today. I only buy at the farmers market. I support local farmers. How can we scale these attitudes that we have towards certain things?
I'd also just like to mention Marcus has a comment in the chat. I'm not sure if you can see that, which...
It's a very good comment, yeah. The comment reads, I think everyone can see it, designing of infrastructures and power frameworks that are so intangible but needed. Is that the comment you're referring to?
Yeah, and so Marcus just above has asked, how can designers rethink scale making? It strikes me that the bread and butter of design is to be specific, e.g. the user, the local experience. Curious to hear thoughts how design can engage in what some scholars have called institutioning, that is to say, leverage existing and build new power frameworks to amplify and scale our impact.
Mm-hmm. Well, one of the things, maybe I'll try the first part, Ed, you know also how to answer this, but from a designer perspective, I very often talk about a transformation from thinking about a product, something in an isolated way, towards system, to think about the complexities of how things are connected and interconnected. And again, I can say, from my perspective, design in general loves complexity. We embrace complexity and we go about things with intention. Sometimes, like I said earlier, with intuition. It's also sometimes just your your gut feel, what you think is right. We try to innovate and we try to inspire. So I think number one, I believe you should not only look at isolated problems. You should always try to understand how they exist in a larger system and kind of how they are connected to other aspects. And secondly, I think you shouldn't shy away from complexity of systems. I think regenerative design, and Ed is a great teacher in on this topic, is actually a very complex system, and it asks us as designers to break it down and to kind of understand singular aspects, but in context of one another, how they are interconnected. So yeah, I think it's related back to the ecosystem, or yeah, I would say the household in of itself. It's about organization. So that would be my answer. Yeah. Organizing things and making sense of individual aspects within a system in context.
Yep. Exactly so. And to build on what Holger's just said, and to link what Richard and Marcus said, I would offer these ideas about regenerative design to be specific. It came to mind for me a few years ago, quite some number of years ago, that sustainable development was not enough. As I began to see companies with terrible records of violating the social license to operate, claiming to have sustainability goals, it became clear to me that this was not going to take us far enough. It really was doing less harm. So I thought, is there a model? Is there a business model? Is there an economic model upon which we can make net simultaneous measurable gains in ecological, social, and economic well-being? Net measurable simultaneous gains in ecological, social, and economic well-being. If every exchange between people, between loved ones, between nation states, and everything in between had that character, then these wickedly complex problems we face would go away. And just to frame this for you, to jump in with your challenges or questions, let's separate. In the lab, we use complexity, science, systemics, and diplomacy to etch away at these complex problems. But let's separate problems into three categories. There's the simple. The simple is cooking from a recipe. If I follow a recipe, I can produce what's in the book. If I just go step by step, that's a simple problem. A complicated problem was getting to the moon. That was a series of engineering steps that had a logic model to them. And if you follow them and use your head, and you're fortunate, you will get to the moon. A complex problem is raising children. No two children are the same. The dynamics are constant. The complexity is rich and joyful, and can also be challenging and frustrating. If we think about these problems and think about our highest and best use of our minds and spirits as human beings, and those four I's that Holger alluded to, intention, intuition, imagination, and inspiration, we can think our way through any complexity, but we have to have the right sort of frame. And we think this idea of generating net measurable simultaneous gains in these three forms of well-being is what the well-being economy could look like at the hyper-local level, to design the economy to be in service of humanity rather than to consume culture, community, and resources to the end of profit for the few at the expense of the many. Okay, now you can jump in and disagree or offer thoughts, please. Anyone? Catherine? Oh, sorry,
there's a great comment also in the chat, again, kind of that suggests to start at larger systemic goals and work yourself towards the smaller components of the system without neglecting the scale of everything. I like that comment very much. Yeah.
Yeah, Scotty, obviously good ideas come to you when you're walking the dog. That's good stuff.
Can you write down or put it in the chat that fantastic definition about gaining net measurable goals? You said something else and I didn't catch it. Could you write that down? Because I think that's a fantastic definition to work with.
I'll offer that to you while others carry the conversation here.
Thank you.
Of course. Thank you for asking.
maybe I can give also one example from my day-to-day work. Again, BMW as a car company is thinking about the car, but if you think about the system of mobility, how people and goods get from A to B, that's really kind of the larger systemic challenge that we're facing, especially in larger cities and so on. And I think, again, the suggestion from Scotty is right on. I believe that you have to understand mobility and cities and how people and goods are moving around before you get to like products like the car as a source for individual mobility. You have to understand the entire context of public transportation, public movements throughout the system. And then you arrive eventually at the role of the car in these systems. And you ask yourself also critical questions: is there still a role of the car in cities of the future? So again, kind of a system that suggests mobility as the overarching challenge, and then certain nodes part of the system that you have to challenge, you have to question, and you have to look at critically as well.
Yeah, and I guess you can even go out further than that, and taking your view from sort of outer space, you have a look at the planet, because that's our largest system that's really relevant to us. And
yes.
What is it that's making it tick and providing the city with all of its needs and stuff? It's the ecology. So you really have to start there, and if you don't, you end up with what we've got.
Yes.
Oh, it's such a good point. This is something we teach in when we teach regenerative design. We remind people that the economy is based on photosynthesis. Everything that we see in the material economy around us, with all of our arrogance of, be able to construct these things that we have around us. One of the things that I respect deeply about Holger and the culture he sets at DesignWorks is there's a great deal of humility that these designers bring to their work, and therefore I think they can give us these positive inflections. But sometimes we forget that the economy is based on photosynthesis, and if we don't protect photosynthetic value and generate these net measurable gains, including sequestration in our gardens, including local energy generation, second curve thinking, not saying we're going to put the fossil fuel industry to death, but simply building something more charismatic and engaging, more permanent, more in line with the heartbeat and the rhythms of nature, whether it's wave or wind, all these things that represent the heartbeat of this precious planet. These are the things that will enervate and inspire the next generation, which the Greta Thunbergs of the world are pleading with us to listen to. And it's so easy to do that. We almost have to distort our minds to support the conventional economy and free our souls and our spirits to think about a regenerative economy where nature's patterns are the design models for how we design our way out of this. One thing that we haven't talked about yet, folks, is food and nutrition. And I know, Sean, this is an area where you're studying. I wonder if any questions come up to you, because we've done a fair amount of work in regenerative redesign of food systems. I could give you an example, but I wonder if any questions about that domain, that really important domain of the economy, arise for you.
I guess it's definitely, I think, something that's interesting to me, both in the local, I guess, something that I'm engaged in my local community around sort of, food activism and how to, scale those sort of things up as well. Like in Brisbane, we have some really great initiatives like the Food Connect Shed, and they do some really, great work making things. They buy boxes of food from locally grown, just to say you can't actually make it to the farmers market every Sunday. It's great if you can, but if you can't, there are people, they have community nodes, so people who volunteer to have all of the boxes for North Brisbane, dropped at their house, and people can go on the way and pick that up to get their fresh, locally grown food for the week that way. But I guess trying to imagine how that could then be scaled up to some sort of larger scale while still retaining the sort of qualities of locality and place, and the environmental sustainability as well is something that I'd be interested, I guess, to hear your thoughts on how that kind of thing might work.
Yeah, Holger, do you have any thoughts you want to offer? You want me to start?
You start.
So think about this. I was mentioning to Sean before we started that we've done work in regenerative and biodynamic farming in the wine sector in the Barossa in Australia, and if you think about terroir and seasonality, there is something about the red grape that makes it do better under stress. So they tend to be grown on hillsides, and the white grape likes sandy or flat soil. But what wants to grow there is a very seasonal local flavor. And if you're conscious of your food, I've been to different districts of Australia, and one of the things that I love is how there's a local opportunity to sample hops. I'm a beer lover, and sampling hops, the plant tastes different in different kinds of soil. We don't want homogeneous 50-cent hamburgers at the great price to animal nutrition, health, and society. What we want is something that is biodynamically and energetically coming from the soil. And I think it's less about scale, Sean, than thinking about connectivity. There's no need for me to have a strawberry in California in the winter. I'll be fine with apples, persimmons. And when springtime comes, I'll have my stone fruit. And when summer and fall come, I'll have some strawberries. But the seasonality of how we design our food cycle, and at the center of every beautiful culture is food. But the glory of seasonality and saying, you know, I'm going to put away the good things of everything pumpkin that happens in America around the holidays. It is inescapable. I swear I'm going to have a pumpkin flavored car on the road one day in the autumn. But if we back ourselves into thinking about connectivity rather than scale, that's how the food economy could be reimagined, and a shared sense of ecological verdance around nutrition. Healthier treated soil produces more nutritious food, and you can only do that on the local scale, and that takes trucks off the road. It puts the economic agency or food self-determination back in the hands of local communities. And by the way, would greatly help our most disadvantaged communities, whether a ghetto in Soweto or a barrio in East Los Angeles, to have food sovereignty, which is, I think, what we really want rather than scale. I hope that helps.
Yes, brilliant.
Others who haven't spoken up, we have many wise people on the Zoom with backgrounds and perspectives and work that you do. Other thoughts? I guess I have a question for Holger to reflect on, because I know that he thinks about this, and I wonder, Holger, as you think about the next generation of designer who is maybe studying anything from interior to graphic to industrial to maker design, shifting the role of designer in society, putting the designer more at the center of things like planning communities. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I think first of all, Ed, I think you and I experienced this most recently at a roundtable that design can facilitate quite well, and that's maybe a function or a skill that hasn't been used so much yet in design. To facilitate conversation, to bring people around the table, even people from very, very different disciplines, people that at the beginning have to even explore what to talk about and how to talk to one another. There might be different languages and so on. So I think you and I experienced this when you bring, you think about it again. Apologies, Scotty, I'm back at the city level, not the planet level, but when you think about a city management, how city managements in successful cities around the globe have integrated, creative minds architects or designers to think about, traffic patterns and mobility. There are cities in Europe like Barcelona and Paris where you see now great examples of managing a city properly. Ed, I think to your question, like there are still, I would say, skills and competencies in a designer that we could tap into to spark a dialogue and a conversation. That's number one. And number two, I think also that, and I appreciated what Catherine said in the beginning, is that, we are all, everyone is a designer in of itself. And I think we can, we shouldn't shy away from, working on problems and challenges, even within our own neighborhood, even within our own house, and so on, and kind of try to reflect outwards and project outwards and inspire others with the work we do. So here again, I think very often, we have to think about the system, but it is very difficult to start with a large scale as an individual. So kind of finding like-minded people around you, inspire others with positive energy. I think that's the role of the designer in the future. Bring people around the table, spark a conversation, inspire people with positive energy and with good examples. I think that's, I really have to say that when I read about projects around the globe that tackle some of these challenges, even at a very small scale, I'm very, very inspired. I'm humbled by people that take on these things and make a change in their neighborhoods with their close by friends and family. So again, reflecting outwards with this energy is very important to me for a designer. But we have it all in us, I think. And maybe for today, I want to, bring it out.
Yeah, the designer within all of us. It's an interesting point here, Michelle, that we're seeing transition design. I'm not familiar with this idea. I don't know, Holger, if you've heard of it. Michelle, do you want to open up your microphone and talk about this a bit? Maybe. We'd love to hear.
Sure. Thank you. Transition design is a fairly new discipline, say 5 to 7 years old, started by Cameron Tonkin-Wise, who's here at UTS in Sydney, but then also together with Gideon Kossoff and I can't believe I'm totally having a blank on the lady's name. She's very much responsible for many parts of my future and my life. The main lady who, why am I blanking on her name? But it is a discipline that originates from design, so using thank you, Marcus. Terry Irwin. I could tell you volumes about how Terry Irwin is responsible for me being in Australia. And what it looks at is what are the new ways of designing, for example, the new and things that designers can use their skills to, as well as bringing that together with what can designers use their skills to do in order to look at different visions of change, to look at different theories of change, to engage in new ways and new ways of being. And so there was a workshop held this morning by 5 of the students from the lab, and I'm also one of them, but I wasn't part of that presentation. So yeah,
I love this. I would love to learn more about it. I have to admit, I haven't heard about this being something being taught. But obviously, Michelle, it's transition and transformation is one of those topics that keep us up at night as designers right now. Organizations try to transform, and especially when it comes to sustainability and circularity, you cannot believe how many organizations are ringing us up at this point of time to and ask us how they could transform and transition into these well-being economies. So I think we need the next generation of designers and creatives, and I can only applaud that at some places there's training for this.
Yeah, it's quite exciting. And as I said, you know, what Marcus has put in here is a 2015 paper. So that sort of kicked off scoping out the area of design, and kind of the threads that built up to it were, I was originally a graphic designer myself, design manager, got into service design from there, strategic design and participatory facilitation of strategy and things like that, and now work in social innovation. And it's smashing up that lineage of practice together with, you know, the sort of European history of transition research and transition management, but shaping it in more of a social and designerly way. So yeah, watch this space. There should be a fair amount coming out of all these students.
Brilliant. It's brilliant stuff. You know, I would like to expand the envelope just one stage as we get close to the end here. And thank you all for your commentary and helping to carry this very fruitful conversation. I'm learning a ton here from all of you, so thank you. You know, we began thinking about design for X back in the 1990s. I remember because I was confused, I followed a path of studying the law in graduate school, and therefore it's amazing that I have any use to society at all. But in the law, there was a point where law intersected with environmental regulation in design for environment. In the mid to late 1990s, we began to think about design for environment, and then design for disassembly, and design for sustainability, and the leadership of Holger's organization, DesignWorks, and this is very important. We are now exploring, because of our deep work in social justice and dealing with the continuing stain in the United States of 400 years of systemic racism, with design for justice. And I want to share an idea. I've been challenging the colleagues within the Foresight Lab to think about justice and reframing it as something bigger, something that is not colonial and offered by the, to use a word that one of the colleagues used in the chat, the overlords, but something that is emergent from community. And I studied diplomacy at the feet of a leader who helped South Africa find its way past apartheid and into a truly post-partisan polycultural society. And there's a word that emerges from the Bantu people, one of the townships in South Africa, that we've been trying to explore as we think about design for justice. I want to tell you about an idea that we have with some colleagues that Holger was good enough to introduce us to, Gensler, a large architecture practice. We've been asked by a large city in the East, Philadelphia, in the east of the US, where we've been doing reimagining policing work, to begin work designing a public safety building where police and firefighters would be co-housed, a building that the design features of which would evoke anti-racism and humanism, holism and community, would evoke justice. And there's a word I would invite you to think about as you go through and reflect on your learning. I'm going to put it into the chat. It's this, I mentioned this at the round table. Holger was referring to. The word is Ubuntu. It's I am because you are. My purpose in the world is fulfilled by being in service of you. And as we think about design for justice and design for a future where our children's safety and security will be nurtured by the economy rather than threatened by it, maybe we could think about design for justice and design for goodness in our food systems, in our learning systems, in our housing systems, in our mobility and city systems, and expect more of ourselves and call out to our better angels in that way.
Didn't you say at some point of time, Ed, or that was coming from a paper, providing joy gives me joy, something like this, you know, it's right. Like in the same lines. I think that there are these very important principles of providing something positive.
When something is suitable,
Very satisfying. Yeah.
It brings us that level of satisfaction, a beautiful object, a perfect round river stone in our hand, or the touch of someone's hand when we're in a moment of need. All of these things evoke a sense of connectedness that the economy is etching away at. And if we expect more and be designers of our own destiny, maybe we can design more for goodness, joy, and justice. Yeah, other thoughts, please. We're happy to be much more practical and tactical too, if you fancy that.
Michelle has just commented in the chat around social justice and police and indigenous. I'm not sure if you wanted to speak to that, Michelle.
Yeah, please do, Michelle. This looks very interesting.
The regenerative justice and social justice is such a rich place for designers and people working in social justice and community-led initiatives, because the cultural change for police in Australia as well as in the United States, I'm American as well, is so profound, and it is in part finding ways to build new relationships first, but also, as you say, looking at how might we use designerly powers to reimagine how we're working together to create a safe space to let go of some of the norms of how we practice, particularly policing and justice work, and also designing new institutions, like taking a leaf out of the page of other youth justice initiatives to design specific youth, forgetting the word, like a specific court for reviewing youth justice issues, and then and for sentencing youth differently, and so redesigning those processes and those institutions is incredibly powerful for the people who are impacted. We have massive problems with high percentages of incarceration of Aboriginal people here, as well as in particular young people, Aboriginal young people, which is not dissimilar to what happens in the States with African American.
You know, this is an interesting inflection. As we come to the end of our time, I'll offer a thought about regenerative design and incarceration. We did a piece of work in the Zuni Nation in the southwest corner of New Mexico, where there were very high incarceration rates and youth incarceration rates. And we went to the state with the Justice Fund, money from the Justice Fund of the Open Society Foundations, and asked the question, what would happen over a 10-year cycle if you took all the money you were putting into incarcerating First Nation youth and put it into education within that nation? We did some work with the county sheriff to create a diversion program. And because sufficient money was provided by the Open Society Foundation, because we had some experience with redesigning education programs in our Future of Learning program, they've done this now for 8 years. And what they have found is that instead of dealing, they think of it in the way the United States does it, I'll blame the United States, we treat troubled youth the way we handle pollution. We handle it at end of pipe instead of at the beginning, instead of designing in fruitful, joyful, engaging education programs for children who haven't had privilege or opportunity. What they have found in New Mexico, and there's now legislation pending to try this on a statewide level, is that for every dollar invested in education, they're gaining $3 or $4 or $5 in entrepreneurship in these youth becoming food entrepreneurs and farming entrepreneurs and learning entrepreneurs and music and art entrepreneurs and sports entrepreneurs. And it's really been quite transformational. New Jersey is studying this, my home state of California is, and all it took was a little bit of rethinking about design of how we treat or act with people who are out of line with society. They got that way for a reason, because of lack of investment at the front end. It's just an example of regenerative design paying social dividends. So maybe that's useful. It sounds like maybe we should have a further conversation though, Michelle. I'd love to learn more of this. Maybe, Holger, you might have a closing thought or two. I will invite you to consider that. I want to start by thanking my colleague Holger, who I've learned much from over the years, and it's always great fun, even at this rather unusual California hour, to share time with him. And maybe, as I was saying to Shan earlier, hopefully we can be there in person next year. I'll just say that the intention and the imagination we have for a regenerative or well-being economy is a beautiful opportunity to reimagine the institutions of civil society. We are trying to make the case to the current Biden administration. In fact, if we have good luck at the midterm election, we will propose a new federal Department of Culture and Heritage to hold the space of having a multi-year conversation to reimagine how we interact with culture and racism and combat this scourge of the climate catastrophe. If we can think of new institutions, because the institutions, brothers and sisters, that got us into these messes will not get us out. If we can design new institutions with open hearts and a spirit of collective well-being, we might have a chance to prove nature wrong, to show her that we belong on this planet and can thrive here with other species. With that, I'll say thank you to Sean and to Rhiannon and the group at NENA, and Holger, to you, and maybe over to you for a few final words too.
Yeah, thanks as well. Thanks, Ed. Likewise, I've learned a lot from you. This is an unusual time to have such conversations, so I hope both of us made sense. Great comments in the chat, and thanks for your participation. Maybe I close with maybe a very personal approach as a designer. I think today we found that we are all designers here on the call, and my closing suggestion is that if you find a minute after this conference, sit down and write yourself a little manifesto. I wrote one for my staff at DesignWorks. Things that everyone actually I found pinned up above the desk, and the manifesto has 10 points for a designer to consider, and I read them to you. I just opened them here in parallel. Number one, look for the unexpected. Look for something that hasn't been there before. 2, stick to your word. If you say something, do it. Dare to dream. Break conventions at least once. Don't try to please everyone. 6, don't settle for mediocrity. 7, be provocative, but deliver. Express your craziness. No whining, no arrogance. And last, let yourself go. So again, maybe a bit of inspiration for the creative people on this call. Something to consider. Thank you all for the conversation.
Beautiful. Beautiful. Thank you for that, Holger. And thanks to all of you for attending. I guess back over to you, Sean, to wrap up.
Sure. Thank you. Thank you, Edward and Holger. That was a really interesting session. I feel like I learned a lot in some of the conversations and the things people were talking about in the chat. The initiatives already happening as well is really wonderful. I'm not sure if you might want to put your contact details in the chat in case people also wanted to get in touch with you. And I think one of the last sessions of the conference, a great way to finish it off. So thank you very much for your time, for joining at what I know is not a usual time to be delivering a session in a conference. Round of applause. And I saw Marcus also has just put in the chat, but just a reminder that the closing plenary will be at 4 p.m. Queensland time in the main Zoom room. So thank you.
One question: How can we access the chat after the session has ended?
I can, I think, send you.
I don't know if I can save the chat window or something, because there are some very interesting links in there.
Yeah, I have just saved it, so I'll email it to you.
Super. Thanks a lot. Thanks a lot again.
Okay.
Thank
and
you.
You can also copy and paste it into a Word document or something.
Yeah,
Okay.
perfect.
Marvelous.
Yeah.
Thank you all so much for the invitation, and thank you, Holger, and a good day to you and a good evening, Holger.
You as well.
Ciao,
Ciao,
ciao.
ciao. Thanks. Thank you.